I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So this is just a description of the Agriculture Law Education Initiative. If you've never checked out our resources, I encourage you to do so. We provide legal education throughout the state to the farming community. Okay, so very brief overview. I know a lot of you are familiar with the project already, but in case we have anyone coming to this webinar who is not familiar with the project, it was really based in the fact that we've got a large amount of land nationally and in Maryland. We're at about 40% that is leased. And we know that conservation practices are less prevalent on leased acres for a variety of reasons. So we recognized it was a complex problem and that it needed to be addressed in a multifaceted way. And so the Agriculture Law Education Initiative and the Hughes Center for Agro-Ecology came together, was able to secure grant funding, and was able to create the Agricultural Conservation Leasing Guide, which many of you are familiar with. But it's really meant to help landowners and farmers with the who, what, and how of conservation on leased land. So inside the guide, it identifies the roles of the different players, what folks in extension versus NRCS versus a soil conservation district, how they could help in this process, how landowners and farmers can address it. So what leasing and communication strategies they can consider, and then sample lease language to support the specific practices. So this was the main resource that sort of forms the basis of the project. Many of you attended one of these sessions. We had 5 regional meetings. This was a while back now. And these were our project goals. So our goals were to train 40 agricultural service providers and then have them go to their various regions in the state, have them train 75 farmers, or educate really, and 15 landowners. And then of those 75 farmers, have 20 of them communicate with the leasing partner, so that'd be a landowner. And of the 15 landowners, have 8 of those landowners communicate with the farmer. And then ultimately the goal was to have 10 farmers make efforts to use conservation practices on leased acres. Good news is that we've been able to surpass our goals. So it's just kind of some interesting things to note. We've actually ended up with a smaller core team of service providers than we initially anticipated, but that's been fine because of that core team of around 20 ag service providers, they've been able to make really incredible impacts throughout the state. And that's what we're here to talk about today, how they did it and what can we learn from the folks that have been able to successfully make those types of impacts. So we've actually been able to reach through the project. All of you have been able to reach 155 farmers and 172 landowners. And so, you know, a lot of interesting things to note from that. Much more landowner interest and support for the project than we anticipated, which is great. And then much more communication than we anticipated. So 46 farmers talking to their landowner partner, 67 landowners talking to their farmer partner, and 53 farmers who've ultimately made efforts to use conservation practices. So that's great news. Great news on a dark and rainy day here in Maryland. So we're really pleased with where the project has ended up at this point. We have until April 2021. And where we are right now is in this period of technical support. So, you know, this webinar today is part of our technical support effort. We wanted to bring some folks together who've been able to work in the space and have a conversation about what else we can do to support your efforts. ALEI and the Hughes Center is here and available to create new resources. We've created a couple different resources that I'll just point out to you over the course of the project, and we're really open to doing that. And some of the resources, like the tax resource I'm going to talk about, something that I originally anticipated creating in support of the project, but I'm more than happy to do that. We are going to be contacting everybody one more time. So I know you've heard from us, you know, probably seems like quite a few times over the last 3 years. We checked in with everybody twice so far, and we'll be contacting everybody again in early 2021 so that we can get some final reporting before the end of the project. I know we're not always seeing people in person these days, but and so some of these resources in hard copy might not be so useful for you, but in case you don't have them around, or in case it would be useful for you to have a link to these resources to email, wanted to point some of them out to you. So we do have one-pager informational sheets. You know, the guide is a fairly substantial document. And so we heard from a lot of folks that they wanted something smaller, more concise that they could pass out to landowners and farmers. And so that's what these are. We have them customized to explain the project and the benefits of it to a farmer, to a landowner, and then we actually have another one that's just talking about financial incentives. All of these resources are available on the Hughes Center's website. So if you need those resources, and after I stop talking here in a minute, I will put that link into the chat box so everybody can have that. So I encourage you to take a look at that webpage if you haven't thus far. That's where, if we come up with some new things, we'll put them there. Our newest resource I wanted to talk about briefly, just so everybody realizes that it's out there and it's available for you. So it's called Navigating Tax Issues When Leasing Farmland. So we heard from some service providers through the project that they were getting some tax questions and that it would be beneficial to have some simple tax information. I'm not an accountant, so I'm careful when I talk about tax issues, but it just goes over some pretty general basic things. Some examples: when must landowners or tenants file a 1099? So there seemed to be a lot of confusion with when a 1099 has to be issued and who's responsible for doing it. So in a fixed cash rent situation, so just a straight cash rent, the tenant has to issue the landlord the 1099. The problem we heard from some folks is that they weren't getting or didn't have the information they needed about the landlord in order to do it. So, that would may entail, one way to do that is to have thanks Josh, put that link in the chat box. Have the landowner fill out a W-9, then you have all the information you need to issue that 1099. Now, if you're doing crop share, that's going to be a different scenario. That'll have a different tax implication, but that is detailed in the resource. So if you're interested in that, encourage you to look at that. We go through when conservation cost share payments are considered taxable income. We heard that sometimes there was some surprise on the part of the landowner, unfamiliar with farm tax issues in some cases, who signed up for cost share for a conservation practice, and then nobody likes an unwelcome tax surprise, right? We're not expecting to get a 1099 representing that cost share income. So I think it's an important thing to just, if this question comes about, if the landowner is going to be the one signing up for the cost share, which happens commonly, that they're just well aware that there's going to be some tax responsibility associated with that. And we also have information in this resource about deductions, which can be really important in this space, because even though cost share income is typically considered taxable income, it can be deducted. And at the end of the day, especially if you're dealing with a landowner who's unfamiliar with farm tax issues, they're going to probably need to find a knowledgeable accountant to help them through the process. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. So we had everybody introduce themselves. And so Alicia is going to kick things off today. She's going to talk to us a little bit about the Soil Health Advisory Committee. It's a fairly new committee at MDA that I think has doing some really interesting work that dovetails really interestingly with our program. And then we're going to hear from Joe Hickman and Brent Kamoff, two gentlemen who've had great success with this program. And we thought they'd be good speakers because they're creating impacts in different parts of the state. So we'll have some different experiences to share. And then if anyone else wants to share their experiences with the project, they'll be welcome to do so. Please go ahead and type in the chat if you have a question or if you have anything to add as we go. And please type in the chat if you have any suggestions for other resources or things that Nancy and I can do to support you, because we're always open to that. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Alicia.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me still?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so Alicia Mulkey again with MDA. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone today. So I don't think it's news, but hopefully folks recognize that the state passed really progressive legislation in 2017 to recognize the benefits of soil health, not just for producers, but also for the environment. And so within that legislation, it directed the department to develop a healthy soils program, and for that program to incentivize conservation practices that would advance healthier soils in the state. So Maryland and MDA, what we chose to do in terms of designing a program was to form an advisory committee through a secretarial appointment. So that was done in kind of late 2019. The committee, you can find information on our website, but it's 32 members, very diverse, both in terms of representation of producers, both scale and kind of operations, geography, but we also have academics, we have members of the legislature, different nonprofit groups, and some of the ag industry. So really a lot of voices very collectively vested in the Healthy Soils program. And shout out to our own Steve Darcy today. He's also a member of the committee and a soil health champion here in the state of Maryland. So since the committee's been formed, and I represent the secretary as kind of taking the leadership for it for the department. So what we've done is to kind of really meet as regularly as possible. A lot of that obviously is virtual right now, but really looking for thoughtful, deliberative conversation to talk about prioritizing conservation practices best associated with soil health and how we would incentivize those. So what's really kind of dovetails nicely with today's conversation is the department and our members at the advisory group really recognize that when we're designing a program, it's not just enough to talk about the financial incentives for the practices, but the other support mechanisms a producer may need to adopt new practices. And so that's especially relevant when we're talking about the lease ground. And you saw Sarah's percentage earlier that there's a significant share of rented ground in Maryland. So when we're talking about soil health practices and producers needing to have a long-term commitment to that ground to really see and benefit from the soil health practices, we really need to make sure that that's accounted for in the program that's being designed. So we participate with webinars like today. I think these are really critical in achieving the outcomes with the Healthy Soil program itself. So we're grateful to the Hughes Center and to the Ag Law Initiative for the hard work over the past few years to promote conservation leases, and that we know these efforts will continue, and that will benefit not just producers, but water quality, soil health, and a number of things important to the department.
Thank you, Alicia. Are there questions for Alicia? Okay, great. Nancy, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to piggyback on Sarah's earlier comment that we do have resources available. And if you do want printed copies to share with people, please let us know. And I'll put my email address into the chat room, and we would be happy to send you copies. So please do that. Also, to piggyback on Sarah's earlier comment, I know it's a trying time for everybody. I know people are having difficulty. The bad side of a rainy day is internet connectivity in a lot of our areas. So let us also know if there are particular ways of delivering programs to you or additional resources that would be most useful. With that, I'm going to actually reintroduce Joe Hickman. We're really happy that Joe was able to join us on this meeting. Joe, as Sarah said, is a farmer. He's also a property and realtor in Kent County and the Upper Shore area. And Joe's been very engaged in this project, which we really appreciate since the beginning. So Joe, I'm just going to start by asking you a couple of questions. I guess one would be, what are some of the conservation practices that seem to be most acceptable or most implemented in the region that you work in? And what do you sort of see as future trends? Do you think that will hold, the same, or are there certain practices that people appear to be becoming interested in? And if you can just provide some, background about some of the groups that you've been working with, farmers or property owners.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Yeah, traditionally, for the last almost 30 years, I've been managing farms. It's currently evolving, like you say. At first it was, the early CRP, some of the early subsidy programs actually before, then the CRP, CREP, and we've gotten a handle around a lot of those, I think, with a lot of owners, who shares in those, how they're shared. Maintenance is always an issue. Ownership is an issue as that changes, and those leases, and some of the work you guys help codify and make comprehensive was that, as I reviewed a lot of my leases with landowners who are from all over the country and all over the world, that you don't miss things, and as an adjunct, how that's happening now is that, like I say, the CREP, CRP type programs, wetlands initiatives were the easy. And now we've got programs with environmental programs, which have some force of contracts with Ducks Unlimited, Shore Rivers, the natural lands, a lot of habitat work. Some are related to hunting, some just related to landowners' interest. And of course, the newest one, and Alicia brought that up, is with the soil health projects. We've started to sell carbon credits on some farms that are eligible. And of course, that brings up, we really are in a brave new world as far as leasing and how that's handled, because there's a lot of responsibility to the operator on record keeping. And so the onus, the land, of course, in typical lease, whether it's shared or rent, but the owner has the land, the farmer provides the inputs, and then there's a share influence, and in some cases, even in a rent, that what the owner provides, are the access and the initial fertility and things like that. But now maybe the soil health work will recognize there are carbon credits available, and then hopefully, we like most farmers in Maryland are pretty progressive, I think, and we like to do all good things, but the economic benefit of that is yet to be totally realized. It's starting to move. The COVID hit it a little hard because of a lot of the sales of carbon credits were to transportation interests, basically airlines. But now that may change, and it's a brand new enterprise. So it's evolved from basically very simple things now to long-term things, and that will affect the language and timing of leases down the road. I'm not hearing you. Oh, sorry.
What would you say are one or two, if you could give one or two key points or lessons learned, either in a good way or the hard way, of trying to start these conversations? What sort of guidance could you give people?
Ooh, well, I think for landowners, whether they're, and this is, and in our area, I don't know, I guess I shouldn't because it's anecdotal to me, but the statistics on maybe the upper shore, and what I manage and handle are production grain farms, some with some livestock, but mostly grain tillable acreage. I'm trying to think where, the challenges are, as you can guess, is knowledge on both parties. And that's what this project has helped me help, and helped, I'm sure it seems like a lot of landowners too. What do you need to know? And there's a lot of people at times in their lives, and I've been one of them, that have signed contracts that we really didn't look at too closely. I don't have a timeshare, but I haven't gotten that far. But as far as CRP contracts, landowners, and this one comes in times we'll find out at sales. Owners agreed to things, liked the project, money was paid, all good, and they never thought they would sell a property or transfer it internally, or have to sell, or, and things and then the penalties for that so it's knowledge. And I think that's where farmers, and there's a lot of astute farmers I know I work with, and I've got leases with 21 different farmers and all in the Upper Shore. And we go over these things because before we go into a program, you need to know a little bit of knowledge or hope about what the owner's interest is. And we have owners that own for pure dollar interest, I would say. I mean, they take care of their farm, but the income is critically important. A lot of those are retired farmers who no longer farm. And then we have charities which need the income. And then we have people that have hunting interests or people that are environmentalists that want their farm to get better. And so you really need to know, like in any contract, know the other party, what their interest is. And farmers have gotten, and when I first started, you met with a farmer, and there are a lot of good ones, and you'd say, well, here's what I do. And you'd say, okay, we'll sign a lease. That sounds fine. How much? Now, astute landowners, because there's a lot of information from places like the ag law and the environmental groups, and that they say, no, I want my farm to do more. And I understand money's still a big component of that, but they want it to do more. So that's where a good lease and a foundation and basically understanding each party is critical. But the reason I say that is because I made enough mistakes in the past with leases that did not include all those things. So I'm getting a little better with age, I hope.
So does anyone have questions for Joe? And Joe, part of it is thank you for your honesty. I think we've all had those same situations with a contract. But does anyone have questions for Joe? Okay, well, I'm going to turn it back to Sarah to introduce Brett. But if you do, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can address it at the end.
Oh, I have one more question for Joe before he goes away from us. So Joe, you say the landowners want their land to do more. So what's the most popular in the last, year or so? What's the most common, I guess, conservation related practice that you've been seeing people adopt in a lease? Is it adherence with a conservation plan? Is it buffers? Like, what are the two parties agreeing to do in order to fulfill the landowner's desires on that part?
I would think in general, I would call it the farm conservation plan. NRCS does a great job, but I would say the enhancement of those to look at soil health, more positive things. That we're not going to do the minimum anymore. We're going to look for more things. And a lot of this depends on funding too, what people want, whether that's in a CRP type program with the state even. But the minimum anymore, we require obviously nutrient management, require active conservation plans, but the asterisk with those conservation plans is that we want to do more, and a lot of that relates to what Alicia is doing with soil health and those benefits that some owners may never realize. I may never be there when they have economic benefit. We hope they have some environmental benefit along the way, and we truly believe that. But I would say that I would call it enhance, and NRCS is certainly on board. They've got a great talented group of young people they're all young to me, but they look at the more positive benefits, et cetera, just getting a plan done now. So I would say.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. And that's a good segue over to Brent. So Brent is a district conservationist in the northern western part of Maryland. So I'm glad he could join us today, coming at this from a slightly different perspective. And Brent, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like most of your impacts or use of the project rather have really been landowner driven. Is that right?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. Yeah, and to kind of jump on to where Joe left it off, it's very poignant because here we are, NRCS, as a soil conservation agency. I haven't been around since it started, but ironically, we have this focus on soil. And I would tell you for the last 60 years, we've probably largely ignored that for what we were doing. And we have this focus of all of these other things. And so interestingly enough, last year, NRCS nationwide made this change in our tools and our software. And now we don't have that choice anymore. Soil health has now been included as basically a requirement in part of every conservation plan that we do. So we're finally actually starting to really, what I feel like, is practice what we preach, from the standpoint of, you know, we have money and we have all these BMPs and we know there's regulations, but really at the end of the day, the thing that we're probably overlooking the most is really the reason why we're here, and that's been the soil. And so now it actually has been brought into that. And so we'll be doing soil health evaluations really in part of every conservation plan we write now, as part of this new assessment that we're doing through the planning process.
Can you talk a little bit about, so, I mean, how are you able to use some of the resources from this project to help those landowners when they come into your office or contact you and want some help in leasing their farm in a different way?
Yep. So I don't know that I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're at a crossroads here. I think different areas have seen these shifts longer ago, and now we're probably just seeing them more so where we're at. But seems like ag is consolidating very quickly. Good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know yet, but it's happening. And so the area I'm familiar with, Frederick, Washington, I live in Pennsylvania. We've seen this dynamic and shift of large operators getting very large. And we've had this shift from the landowners of having concerns, whether it's been related to weather events. I would tell you that's probably the most prevalent thing, is that we get calls of concern of, hey, now I physically see my soil running everywhere. Why is this happening? And so in the past year, there's been a few things that have happened that I've never had happen in my career. And some of those things are, one, landowners wanting to meet to have us identify why these problems are happening on their land, and really figure out what the solutions are there, because it is now things they're thinking about. Hey, I don't really want to get rid of my farmer, but if this is something I need to work into a lease, that's what we're going to do. And then the other part of it has been, I certainly never had this happen before, in the sale of property, farms being sold, changing hands. We've now started to get questions about putting a value on people's organic matter levels on their farm, which seems maybe still a little far-fetched. However, it's happening. We continue to get interest from people on it, and for a number of different reasons. But if people are starting to really realize that there's something to that and they're cognizant of that, hopefully it catches on and it changes. So, that's really how we're being approached from people at this point. Like I said, I think largely due to weather events, and really, to me, the reality of it is, small, medium, large farms, none of that matters. The reality is that we're seeing operations. I looked at it this morning, in Frederick County. The furthest operator coming to farm ground in Frederick County is 100 miles away. I would have told you that 20 years ago that seemed incredibly far-fetched that someone would drive equipment 100 miles to farm ground. And now it seems commonplace. Why would you want to deal with the traffic in Maryland driving 100 miles on a tractor? I have no idea why. But So it's driven land prices up. People are doing that very commonly, but what it probably a side effect of that is that it just so happens that when you are driving 100 miles to farm ground, most likely you are not going to be able to take care of the ground that is 2 miles away from you the way you can take care of the ground 100 miles away from you. So there has been a lot of cause for concern from landowners who are, the ones that are 100 miles away, seeing some of these changes on their ground that have never happened before, and realizing that maybe $300 and $400 an acre is not as great as they thought it was originally.
That's interesting. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Joe. So what types of conservation practices do you find parties in your neck of the woods are able to agree on and implement on a leased piece of ground?
Yeah, so I would tell you we have a little bit different scenario because of as much, I guess, diversity in livestock that we have versus an area like the shore, where we still, if I look in Frederick County, we do a very large amount of the work for the entire state, federally wise, generally somewhere in the 50% vicinity. So we probably have a third of our contracts that are truly on leased land. And so we still have an ability to do a lot of structural stuff. Certainly, conversion to grazing and troughs and fencing, those are all pretty common things that people are, okay with from the landowner renter standpoint that we're able to do. We're still able to do some of those larger structures, in the dairy world. Some of those landowners that have had a dairy farmer renting their ground for the last 60 years are very dedicated to that. These people, continuing to be able to be in the dairy business. So we do a lot of practices that way. And then really the other big push is, yes, agronomic practices. I mean, as strange as this sounds, Maryland is very progressive. We do have, obviously more farmers doing the cover crop and the agronomic stuff than most places. But again, it comes down to, if you have 4,000 acres, there's only enough time in the day. And, you're seeing, as you get away from some of their home bases, less and less cover crop, less and less diversity in cover crop, different ways cover crop gets established that might not make it as good as it is, when they had more time to do it, when they were closer. So we still have a large amount of the agronomic practices getting put on lease land, and a fair amount of the structural stuff too. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be even more of a focus put on the agronomic practices. And I think we're going to see something to where people say, look at it and would have said before, oh, they're doing cover crop on my ground. That's fantastic. And I think now you're going to see people say, why are you only doing a single species of cover crop, or why are you seeding it this way? I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I hope you're right about that, or you might be right about that from some of the conversations I've been a part of. Do you have any general lessons that you can share with others in the group with talking about these resources and dealing with the farmer to landowner relationship? I'm happy to hear from you and Joe that, I mean, you both acknowledge it's not an easy task, but one of our goals with the project right at the outset was, we don't want to create resources that would in any way, degrade the leasing relationship. We hope these resources will help people be able to communicate with each other and help people reach consensus, or if they've already reached consensus, put that consensus down in paper in a simple way. So do you have lessons to share about the best way to do that between parties?
Well, I would tell you, I'm not going to say that it's the best way. Obviously, I think sitting here, we know it is a slippery slope. I can think of the few situations I've been in Frederick, and it's one of those things where the landowner had their concerns. I rode around the farm with them and took a look at them, and then said I'd love to have a conversation with the farmer. We rode around in a different vehicle, and I don't know if the conversation would have been the same if we were all sitting there in the same vehicle. That's probably the reality of it. But I mean, the truth is, I think on both parts, there's been things that I have been able to sit and talk with them both about, and the reality of here's the list of things that we think need some improvement. And I think it's really been a matter of we've been able to work some of those things out that both parties have been able to agree on. Yes, we both have a vested interest in these things, so maybe it's the things we can focus on, and that's where we start. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of this, from that dynamic of it's uncomfortable because, in some of those cases, people are legitimately looking and going, this bridge has already been burnt, and we're really here saying, hey, if this person is unwilling to do this, we're talking to you to make sure we know what we should put in the lease for the next person. At least in all of the ones that I've been involved in, they've given the person an opportunity that is renting their land to say, hey, here's what I would ask you to do or want you to do at a minimum. And to be quite honest, what I've seen so far is that there's been a lot of people who weren't able to commit to those things. And what they've offered is increased money for rent to kind of offset some of those other things that they knew that they wouldn't, maybe not be able to get done because of weather or because of whatever reasons. And, so far in some of those cases, the money offered has not won out. The landowners turned a different direction. So, I don't know that I have the best way. And unfortunately, through some of this, I think that people are going to realize that there's going to be people who can't do what they ask them to do or what they need them to do for all kinds of different constraints that people have. But nonetheless, I do think that's probably still a good thing. Again, I have nothing against someone who farms 10,000 acres, but the reality of it is, if you farm 10,000 acres, that doesn't mean that it's okay that 6,000 of it has so much erosion that you're really degrading the soil to nothing. That's not okay either. So I think there's going to be a harsh reality here that we see some of this. It's going to be a matter of how quick does this catch on, because the reality is now is that's what I said. I feel like we're at a crossroads. That's not the norm yet, and we're still very much in this fight of people coming from all over the place offering double and triple land rent prices of what they should be just to have ground. So I don't know when all of those things are going to finally come crashing all together, but I think we're there. The other thing I would say involved in that, whether this is happening in other places or not. So there's a recognition here from a lot of different groups of people that this is something that should be looked at. So I know in Frederick County itself has a soil health group and a regenerative agriculture group within the county that basically acts as a liaison to a council in the county that they've just formed. And they're kind of going around assessing the needs and figuring out what type of plan they can have at the county level, and from that standpoint of where they need to be focused. So I feel like this is this is something that, even though we've been doing this for eons, maybe it's because we called it soil health now. I have no idea, but maybe it is to the point where people realize this needs to be a focal point. We can't keep kicking the can down the road.
Interesting. I didn't realize that at that county group. That's really interesting. Mrs. Lednam, did you want to say something about leasing?
I did, if I may. Can you hear me?
I can.
Usually
Go ahead.
internet connectivity is difficult in our part of the world. Okay. I went to your program at Chesapeake College, Y Mills, and I got your notebook pertaining to leasing. And my goal as a landowner is to maintain farmland as farmland, which in today's world is getting more difficult. I rely heavily on our farmer. Our home farm has been verbally a cost share since the mid-60s. In 2008, we acquired the Queen Anne's County farm. That also was taken over by our farmer. And when you look at approaches to the landowners, I think the direct approach is the best approach. Don't beat around the bush. Our farmer is excellent. He has conservation plans. And I don't think we're on your statistics, but when we started out this whole thing, as I said, we were verbally cost sharing. Within the month, I have signed a contract with our farmer to lease. So there's 2 more farms to add to your list.
That's wonderful.
And I think it is too. Sometimes the requirements that the government puts on the farmers is unrealistic, like getting the cover crop planted by thus and such a date, when weather like we have now precludes him from even getting on the fields. I think if you want to look at one thing, you want to look at more flexibility for the farmer, because in the end, he's the one that bears the brunt of all this, not the landowners, the farmers. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that. No, I'm really happy to hear that. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've been happy every time the last couple of weeks I've been able to hear those planes flying with the cover crop, but it's been so wet. It's been really hard. And I agree. We tried, and there's always room for improvement to make those lease clauses in the guide to provide for flexibility. But I think you're right. Sounds like you have a wonderful partnership with your farmer, and that's the person who's out there every day, and they deserve that flexibility in order to achieve both of your goals for the farm. So thank you for sharing that.
That is correct. Mm-hmm. That is correct. Thank you.
Nancy, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or does anyone else have anything else they would like to share with us?
Yeah, I think at this point, we would really like to hear from more experiences, similar to the one that was just shared with us, but also about your challenges. So if there are things that we can do, this project's really for you, and we want to make it as beneficial as we possibly can. So really just throw the floor open to you.
I have a question about statistics. In Maryland, you indicate about 60% of land farmers is farmer-owned land. That's what,
Yes.
And is that from the Maryland Ag Statistics?
Yes, from the Census of Ag. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that sounds off to you?
Yes, I do.
What do you think what do you think it is or should be?
Of course, this is all anecdotal from our area, but I would say because some retired I manage farms for retired farmers, and they're not farmers anymore. They're sharecropping. It's actually a lease arrangement, but it may show up as an owner operator. I don't know. I've filled out enough ag census forms. I'm not sure sometimes how they capture this accurately, but it seems like that's a little high. Of course, in our area, Upper Shore, we have a fair amount of investors from and charities, investors, and different interests. So maybe it's just here. I see it differently than maybe a Frederick. Brent it may be different there, but there are people that buy farms because they like to own a farm and are not. But it seems to me a lot of our farmers are leasing about at least half to 2/3 of their acreage, and that's the problem with long-term conservation type practices. They don't have most don't have long-term leases. But that's all. I was just curious how that number came about. I didn't think it was that high.
So Steve, Darcy, not to put you on the spot, but
No
do
problem.
you have any idea if that number is pretty true throughout the state, or
The number is 60. What is the number? 60% of farmland is owned by farmers?
Owned and operated versus.
owned and operated?
Yeah.
Well, I can only speak for the counties that I'm involved with, and I think it's going to be county specific. More of your rural counties are probably, yes, that's probably true. But in, say, Prince George's County, we have a lot of absentee landowners and landowners that own the farm but lease it to the actual producer. The problem with the census is, and I agree with Joe, I filled out a bunch of them. Every year I scratch my head to really see if I'm reading it correctly and filling it out correctly. But in my situation, even though I used to full-time farm, and then of course when I became involved with how to get a full-time job, I became a part-time farmer. Now I pretty much lease all my grain land to a full-time farmer. And the arrangement that we have made on the home farm has been very good for the family and also for the farmer. We do not an acres rent, we do a percentage of the gross sales. So if the farmer has a tough year, then we all suffer together. If we have a bumper crop year, we'll benefit at the same time. The other thing we've done is that farmer, he's taking all the risk. I mean, as a landowner, we certainly have risks, and we have taxes to pay and things like that. But he or she, they are really taking the biggest gamble. So our arrangement has always been, if there are federal programs that come by, then they get 100% of it. I have to sign off all the paperwork through FSA, but that gives the producer incentive to do a good job. We insist that well, of course, he wants to get his federal payment, he has to have an approved NRCS plan. But being a soil health champion and being well-versed in that area and a real believer in it, and my farmer that I have it on the home farm, he is also, but we do all no-till, all cover crop. We've been doing no-till probably for 30 years now. And we've just seen tremendous benefits. And so in my case, we don't really even necessarily have to have that discussion. But we do have a lot of landowners that they just don't understand the concept of even having a verbal lease. They just want somebody to do their farm because they want to keep their ag assessment. That's a major driver for non-farmers leasing their land to a producer. Keep their ag assessment, because if you lose your ag assessment, it's hard to get it back. So I think this has been a wonderful project. I think more people need to have written contracts, especially with the different programs involved. One of the things I see coming down the road I think it's going to be a big benefit for both producers and landowners is carbon trading. I have a feeling that carbon trading is going to be the big moneymaker in the next, I don't know, who knows, maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years, who knows. More so than nutrient trading. Everybody had promoted nutrient trading, but that just didn't really fly. I think in Maryland, nutrient trading, you got the most bang for your buck by planting trees. Well, I can't take a tree to the market every year and get paid. So, only a certain landowner or producer really would, wants to take productive ag land and put it into trees. However, with soil health practices and carbon sequestration, I can stay in farming and be productive and make, extra money. I think it's going to be a really big win for everybody.
Thank
And
you,
Nancy,
Steve.
You can put me on the spot anytime, Nancy.
Thank you. So does anybody else have an experience to share or a question?
I did want to say one
do you
thing.
want to?
I did want to say
Go
one
ahead.
thing. People somewhere, I think it was Sarah that mentioned, if you do max cost share through the state, you indeed will get a 199. And we learned that the hard way many years ago. One of our landowners, because we were oblivious to it. I'm not sure they always do it, but this landowner got a 1099 and she was very upset. But we worked it all out because even it's considered a grant. So the money that they spent to put the project in, she could deduct it off of her taxes. So it was kind of a moot point. But when you get a 1099 for something that you expected you weren't going to get, that can be a problem. So we always try to advise the landowner, the cooperator, that, hey, look, you're going to get a certain percentage back from the state, but you will also get a 1099. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think just providing that information up front probably prevents a lot of panic and stress down the road. We don't want that. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know everybody's got competing Zoom meeting obligations and we're all busy. But, I think Nancy and I are really appreciative of everybody and thank you for everything that everybody has shared. The door's open with us. Be in touch with us as you think about things. As you are able to help other people through the project, please be in touch with us because we'd like to keep track of all that. And we will definitely do the same to you. We've applied for some grant funding to do kind of a 2.0 of this project. So if that comes through, we'll definitely let you know. But we're here for you guys. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.